For weeks, Caitlin Clark seemed to be at the center of a storm that refused to go away. Every game generated another headline. Every hard foul sparked another debate. Every viral clip fueled another round of arguments across social media. Fans watched as the most talked about rookie in basketball faced relentless scrutiny, intense physical play, and pressure unlike anything most young athletes ever experience. Yet what made the situation even more unusual was the silence surrounding it. Many of the loudest voices in sports media appeared hesitant to fully address what was happening, while countless fans questioned why so few prominent basketball figures were willing to publicly weigh in. The conversation kept growing larger, the spotlight kept getting brighter, and the tension surrounding Caitlin Clark only continued to build. It felt as if the entire basketball world was watching the same story unfold night after night, waiting for someone with real influence to finally say what everyone else was thinking. Then, something unexpected happened. The silence began to crack, and it wasn't coming from WNBA executives, league representatives, or carefully prepared statements. Instead, some of the biggest names in basketball started speaking up. These weren't routine compliments handed out during interviews. They weren't polite acknowledgments designed to avoid controversy. They were genuine reactions from players who understood exactly what it means to perform under enormous pressure while carrying the weight of public expectations. One after another, NBA stars began sharing their thoughts about Caitlin Clark, her impact on the game, the attention surrounding her career, and the challenges she was facing. Some praised her talent, some focused on her influence, others pointed to the bigger picture of what her arrival meant for basketball as a whole. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer limited to the WNBA, it had become a basketball conversation, and that changed everything. What made these reactions so fascinating wasn't simply who was talking, it was what they were actually saying. Several NBA stars didn't discuss Caitlin Clark as a promising young player or an exciting rookie. They talked about her as someone already transforming the sport. They spoke about her popularity in the same breath as established NBA superstars. They compared her influence to players who have spent years building their careers at the highest level. Some openly acknowledged the pressure she faces every time she steps onto the court. Others pointed out how much attention she has brought to women's basketball in an incredibly short amount of time. And perhaps most importantly, many of these comments came from players who had absolutely nothing to gain by making them. They spoke because they believed what they were seeing deserved recognition. But this story isn't as simple as universal support. While several NBA stars publicly praised Clark, not every reaction followed the same script. Some players gave answers that immediately sparked debate among fans. Others made comments that were interpreted in completely different ways depending on who was listening. A few responses generated as much discussion as Clark herself. That divide revealed something important. Caitlin Clark's presence in basketball has become impossible to ignore, but the way people react to her remains one of the most polarizing topics in sports. Her rise has inspired admiration, criticism, curiosity, and endless discussion, often at the same time. And that's exactly why this story matters. This isn't just about a collection of celebrity opinions. It's about what happens when a player becomes so influential that everyone feels compelled to respond. Whether those responses are supportive, skeptical, enthusiastic, or cautious, they all point toward the same reality. Caitlin Clark has become one of the most talked about athletes in the world, and her impact extends far beyond a single league. The reactions from NBA stars offer a unique window into how basketball's biggest names view this unprecedented moment. Some saw a superstar in the making. Some saw a player already changing the sport. Others saw a phenomenon unlike anything basketball has experienced in years. And when you put all of those reactions together, a much bigger picture begins to emerge, one that reveals why Caitlin Clark's story may be far more significant than anyone originally imagined. The reason NBA players suddenly started talking about Caitlin Clark wasn't because she hit a game-winning shot or put together a hot streak of performances.
NBA stars see great basketball every single day. They've shared courts with MVPs, champions, and future Hall of Famers. It takes something much bigger than a few impressive highlights to capture their attention. What caught their attention was the sheer scale of what was happening around Caitlin Clark. Almost overnight, she became the center of basketball conversations across the entire sports world. Every game she played generated headlines. Every hard foul became a trending topic. Every post-game discussion turned into another national debate. The spotlight surrounding her wasn't normal for a rookie, and it certainly wasn't normal for a player entering a league that had spent years fighting for mainstream attention. Whether people loved her, criticized her, supported her, or doubted her, everyone seemed to be talking about her. And eventually, even NBA players couldn't ignore it anymore.
What made the situation impossible to overlook was that the discussion had moved far beyond basketball itself. Normally, when a rookie enters a professional league, the conversation revolves around statistics, development, and wins or losses. With Caitlin Clark, it became something entirely different. Fans debated how opponents defended her. Analysts argued over whether she was receiving fair treatment. Social media dissected every interaction, every foul, every reaction, and every post-game quote. Some believed she was being tested because of the enormous attention she brought to the league. Others argued that physical play was simply part of professional basketball. Regardless of which side people supported, one thing became obvious. Caitlin Clark wasn't just playing basketball anymore. She had become the focal point of a cultural discussion that extended well beyond the boundaries of the WNBA. NBA players understood that kind of pressure better than anyone. Many of them had experienced what it feels like to enter the spotlight before they were ready. They knew what it was like to have every mistake magnified and every success questioned. Players like LeBron James spent years carrying expectations that most athletes could never imagine. Others dealt with criticism from media outlets, fans, and former players throughout their careers. So when they watched Caitlin Clark navigate an environment where every game seemed to produce a new controversy, many recognized something familiar. They weren't just watching a talented rookie, they were watching someone deal with the challenges that often come with becoming the face of a movement. Another reason the conversation grew louder was because the numbers were becoming impossible to ignore. Arena attendance surged whenever Clark was on the schedule. Television audiences reached levels that generated national headlines. Road games suddenly felt like major events. Teams were moving contests to larger venues to accommodate demand. Sports networks that previously paid limited attention to women's basketball were now dedicating entire segments to discussing Clark and the impact she was having on the league. Whether someone viewed her as a superstar, a rising talent, or simply a fascinating story, the results were undeniable. The attention surrounding women's basketball had reached a level few people could have predicted, and many observers connected that surge directly to Caitlin Clark's arrival. But there was another factor driving NBA players to speak publicly. They weren't only noticing the attention she was receiving, they were noticing the reaction to that attention. Every accomplishment sparked another argument. Every milestone generated another wave of criticism from someone. Every positive headline was followed by a debate about whether she deserved it. For many NBA veterans, that pattern looked familiar. History has shown that whenever an athlete dramatically changes the popularity of a sport, strong reactions often follow. Some embrace the change immediately. Others resist it. Some celebrate the spotlight. Others question it. Caitlin Clark had become the latest athlete standing directly in the middle of that collision, and NBA players could see it unfolding in real time. That's why the comments that followed carried so much weight. These weren't random celebrity endorsements. They came from players who understood pressure, expectations, criticism, and fame at the highest possible level. When they began discussing Caitlin Clark, they weren't simply reacting to a few highlights on social media. They were responding to a phenomenon that had become impossible to ignore.
And interestingly enough, one of the first major NBA stars to publicly acknowledge that reality wasn't LeBron James, Steph Curry, or Luka Dončić. It was a player whose comments caught many fans completely by surprise. And what he said revealed just how much Caitlin Clark's influence had already spread throughout the basketball world. One of the most surprising endorsements Caitlin Clark received didn't come from a player known for making bold headlines or controversial statements. It came from Pascal Siakam, an NBA champion, multiple-time All-Star, and one of the league's most respected veterans. That's exactly why his comments stood out. Siakam isn't the type of player who chases attention with dramatic quotes. He usually lets his game do the talking. So when he unexpectedly brought up Caitlin Clark during a discussion about popularity and fan support, people immediately took notice. What made the moment so fascinating wasn't simply that he mentioned her name, it was the company he placed her alongside. When Siakam was asked about which players received the most love from fans, many expected him to mention established NBA stars. After all, he shares a locker room with some of basketball's biggest names and competes against global superstars every night. Instead, Caitlin Clark entered the conversation almost immediately, not as a side note, not as an honorable mention, and certainly not as a courtesy answer. Siakam openly suggested that the level of support Clark receives is on another level entirely. In fact, he compared the attention surrounding her to that of one of the NBA's own stars, Tyrese Haliburton. That comparison may not seem shocking at first glance, but the deeper you think about it, the more significant it becomes. Tyrese Haliburton isn't just another NBA player. He's one of the faces of the Indiana sports scene, an all-star point guard, and one of the most popular athletes in his city. Comparing anyone to that level of support is meaningful. Comparing a rookie WNBA player to that level of support is something entirely different. What Siakam was essentially acknowledging was that Caitlin Clark had already transcended the traditional boundaries that often separate men's and women's basketball audiences. She wasn't simply attracting WNBA fans anymore. She was attracting basketball fans, sports fans, casual viewers, people who may never have watched a WNBA game before, but suddenly found themselves tuning in to see what all the attention was about. That distinction matters because popularity in professional sports is incredibly difficult to achieve. Talent alone doesn't guarantee it. There have been countless elite players throughout basketball history who never became household names. Yet somehow, Caitlin Clark managed to become one of the most recognizable figures in the sport before even completing her first professional season. Siakam's comments reflected that reality. He wasn't evaluating shooting percentages or stat sheets. He was recognizing influence. He was acknowledging the kind of attention that organizations spend years trying to create, the kind of attention that changes television ratings, fills arenas, dominates social media, and forces people to pay attention whether they planned to or not. What made the quote even more powerful was how naturally it came out. There was no elaborate explanation, no prepared speech, no attempt to manufacture a viral moment. Siakam simply answered honestly. Sometimes those are the comments that reveal the most. Athletes spend so much time navigating interviews carefully that spontaneous reactions often carry more weight than lengthy statements. In that brief moment, Siakam unintentionally highlighted something many observers were already beginning to realize. Caitlin Clark's rise wasn't being viewed as a temporary craze by NBA players. Increasingly, they were treating her impact as something very real and very significant. The timing also made the comments particularly important. At that point, debates surrounding Clark were dominating sports coverage almost daily. Some people argued the attention was excessive. Others believed it was completely justified. Regardless of where someone stood, the fact that respected NBA veterans were voluntarily entering the conversation suggested that Clark's influence had reached a level that could no longer be dismissed. This wasn't media hype talking to itself anymore. This was one of the NBA's most accomplished players openly acknowledging that a WNBA rookie had become one of the biggest attractions in basketball. And as notable as Siakam's comments were, they wouldn't be the last. In fact, another Indiana player would soon take the conversation even further. Unlike Siakam, this next player wasn't speaking from a distance. He had a front row seat to the phenomenon every single day. He saw the crowds, he witnessed the excitement, he understood the impact firsthand. And his comments revealed something even more surprising about how NBA players were beginning to view Caitlin Clark's place in the basketball world. While Pascal Siakam's comments highlighted Caitlin Clark's growing popularity, Obi Toppin's reaction revealed something arguably more important: respect. Not the kind of respect that comes from headlines, television ratings, or social media followers. The kind that comes directly from fellow athletes who understand exactly how difficult it is to perform at the highest level. That's what made Toppin's comments stand out. He wasn't trying to make a statement about the future of the WNBA. He wasn't entering a debate about league politics or media coverage. He was simply speaking as a basketball player who appreciated what he was seeing from another basketball player. And sometimes those are the comments that tell you the most.
What made Toppin's remarks unique was how genuine they felt. There was no polished speech, no carefully crafted talking points, no attempt to create a viral moment. Instead, he spoke with the kind of natural enthusiasm that usually only appears when someone genuinely enjoys watching another athlete compete. When he talked about Caitlin Clark, he described her as amazing and spoke about how exciting it was to see her around games. On the surface, that might sound like a simple compliment, but the deeper meaning was hidden in the way he described the relationship between NBA and WNBA players. Rather than treating women's basketball as something separate, he talked about it as part of the same basketball community. That distinction matters because for years, there has often been an invisible divide between conversations surrounding the NBA and the WNBA. Players from both leagues have always respected one another, but public discussions frequently treated them as entirely separate worlds. Toppin's comments suggested something different. He spoke about watching Caitlin Clark play with the same excitement fans bring when watching NBA stars. He described the mutual appreciation that exists between players at the highest levels of basketball. In doing so, he unintentionally highlighted one of the biggest changes Caitlin Clark had helped create. More and more NBA players weren't simply aware of what was happening in the WNBA, they were actively paying attention. That growing interest wasn't happening by accident. Clark's games had become events. Every appearance generated discussion. Every performance created new storylines. Players around the basketball world were seeing the crowds, the ratings, and the constant media attention. But beyond all of that, they were also watching the actual games. They were seeing the deep shooting range, the court vision, the confidence, and the competitive fire that had made Clark one of the most talked about players in sports. Toppin's comments reflected that reality. His praise didn't feel forced because it wasn't based solely on popularity. It was based on basketball. Perhaps the most revealing part of Toppin's remarks was the sense of equality behind them. He wasn't speaking about Caitlin Clark as a celebrity making appearances at NBA events. He wasn't treating her as a guest in the basketball world. He spoke about her as someone who belonged there, someone who had earned the attention she was receiving, someone whose games players genuinely wanted to watch. That's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. True respect in sports isn't about publicity. It's about acceptance from your peers. And increasingly, that acceptance seemed to be coming from all corners of the basketball world. As more NBA players began openly discussing Clark, a pattern started to emerge. The conversation was no longer focused solely on what she was doing statistically. It was becoming about influence, presence, and impact. Players weren't just praising a rookie, they were acknowledging a phenomenon. And while Toppin's comments offered a glimpse into that growing respect, the next reaction would reveal something even more fascinating. Because unlike Siakam or Toppin, the next player had a front row seat to the Caitlin Clark phenomenon every single day.
He saw the attention up close. He witnessed the pressure firsthand, and his perspective would offer one of the most revealing insights yet into what Caitlin Clark was truly dealing with behind the scenes. If Pascal Siakam highlighted Caitlin Clark's popularity and Toppin emphasized the respect she was earning from fellow players, Tyrese Haliburton revealed something far more personal. He pulled back the curtain on the pressure. Unlike most NBA players commenting from a distance, Haliburton had a unique perspective on the entire phenomenon. He wasn't watching from another city or another conference. He was witnessing it unfold right in front of him. As one of Indiana's biggest sports stars, Haliburton understood exactly how much attention Caitlin Clark was generating throughout the state. He saw the packed arenas. He saw the media coverage. He saw the constant conversations surrounding every game. More importantly, he understood something many fans overlooked. Behind all the highlights and record-breaking viewership numbers was a young athlete carrying an enormous amount of weight on her shoulders. When Haliburton spoke about Clark, his comments immediately stood apart from many of the other reactions. He didn't begin by discussing three-point shooting. He didn't focus on statistics or accolades. Instead, he talked about her as a person. He talked about spending time around her, getting to know her, and seeing firsthand how she handles the endless attention surrounding her career. That perspective mattered because it came from someone who understood fame at a professional level. Haliburton knows what it feels like to represent a franchise. He knows what it feels like to have expectations placed on him every time he steps onto the court. Yet, even with that experience, he openly acknowledged that Caitlin Clark was dealing with something unusually intense.
One of the most revealing parts of Haliburton's comments was his recognition of the noise surrounding Clark. He pointed out that there was constant rhetoric attached to her name, much of it completely outside of her control. Think about that for a moment. Every major performance generated headlines. Every tough loss sparked criticism. Every hard foul turned into a national debate. Even conversations that had nothing to do with basketball often found their way back to Caitlin Clark. Very few athletes enter professional sports under that kind of microscope. Most rookies are given time to develop quietly. Clark never had that luxury. From the moment she entered the league, she became one of the biggest stories in American sports. What impressed Haliburton wasn't simply Clark's ability to play through that environment, it was the way she handled it. Time after time, she found herself at the center of debates she never created. People argued about her impact on the league. People argued about media coverage. People argued about how opponents played against her. Yet, despite all the attention, Clark continued showing up and competing. According to Haliburton, that ability to navigate constant scrutiny was one of the most impressive things about her, not because it made headlines, but because most people have no idea how difficult it is to maintain focus when millions of eyes are watching your every move. Then came the statement that truly caught everyone's attention. Haliburton suggested that Caitlin Clark was already among the most famous basketball players currently playing the game, not just in the Wnba, not just among female athletes, basketball players, period. That's an astonishing statement coming from an NBA All-Star. Think about the names that immediately come to mind when discussing basketball fame. Players like LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and Luka Dončić dominate global conversations. Yet Haliburton believed Clark belonged in that broader discussion. Whether someone agreed with the exact ranking or not, the message was clear. Her visibility had reached a level that even NBA stars were acknowledging publicly. What makes that observation even more remarkable is how quickly it happened. Most athletes spend years building that kind of recognition. Some never reach it at all. Yet Clark arrived in the professional ranks and immediately became one of the most discussed figures in the sport. That level of attention creates opportunities, but it also creates enormous pressure. Expectations rise, criticism intensifies. Every success is analyzed, every mistake becomes news. Haliburton's comments served as a reminder that behind all the records, ratings, and viral moments,
was a person dealing with challenges that very few athletes ever experience. And perhaps that's why his words resonated so strongly. Unlike many observers who focused exclusively on Clark's impact, Haliburton focused on what it takes to survive that impact. He wasn't just praising her talent, he was acknowledging her resilience. He was recognizing the mental strength required to handle an unprecedented level of attention while continuing to perform at an elite level. Coming from someone who understands professional sports pressure firsthand, that may have been one of the most meaningful endorsements Clark received. But if Haliburton offered insight into the pressure Caitlin Clark was carrying, the next reaction would come from someone who knows more about handling expectations than almost anyone in sports history. Because when LeBron James finally weighed in on the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, he didn't just talk about basketball. He talked about something much bigger, and his comments would reveal why he saw shades of his own journey in the young superstar's rise. There are compliments from fellow athletes, and then there are endorsements that instantly change the conversation. When LeBron James and Trae Young publicly discussed Caitlin Clark, it felt less like routine praise and more like an acknowledgement that something significant was happening in basketball. These weren't players trying to create headlines. These were two of the NBA's most recognizable stars reacting to a phenomenon they could no longer ignore. And because of who they are and what they've accomplished, their words carried a different level of credibility. When players at that level speak, fans listen, the media listens, the basketball world listens. That's why their reactions became such a major part of the Caitlin Clark story. LeBron's comments stood out because they weren't focused solely on Clark's talent. Plenty of people had already praised her shooting, passing, and scoring ability. What interested LeBron was the impact she was having on the sport itself. Throughout his career, LeBron has witnessed firsthand what happens when a player becomes bigger than the game. He understands the pressure that comes with being expected to elevate an entire league. He knows what it feels like when every headline, every criticism, and every conversation somehow circles back to your name. That's why many fans immediately connected with his perspective. He wasn't speaking as an observer. He was speaking as someone who had lived through a similar level of attention. One of the most interesting parts of LeBron's comments was his focus on growth. Rather than getting caught up in the endless debates surrounding Clark, he emphasized the attention she was bringing to women's basketball. More people were watching, more people were talking about the league, more people were invested in games they might never have paid attention to before. For LeBron, that was worth celebrating. Regardless of where someone stood on the various controversies surrounding Clark, the increased visibility was undeniable. Entire conversations about women's basketball were reaching audiences that previously existed outside the sport. That kind of influence is rare, and LeBron recognized it immediately. There was also an unmistakable sense of empathy in his remarks. LeBron understands what it feels like to have every word analyzed and every performance scrutinized. He understands what it's like when people are waiting for mistakes, waiting for failures, and waiting for reasons to criticize. When he discussed Caitlin Clark, many fans felt he was acknowledging those realities. Not because their careers are identical, but because the pressure that comes with becoming the face of something larger than yourself can be overwhelming. LeBron's support wasn't just about basketball. It was about recognizing the challenges that come with carrying extraordinary expectations. Then came Trae Young, and his perspective added an entirely different layer to the conversation. Unlike LeBron, who focused heavily on Clark's impact and influence, Trae focused on the basketball itself. And coming from one of the NBA's most dangerous long-range shooters, that praise carried serious weight. Trae has built his career on confidence, deep shooting range, and offensive creativity. Those are some of the very same qualities that helped turn Caitlin Clark into a household name. So when he openly expressed admiration for her game, it felt less like a celebrity endorsement and more like recognition from a fellow specialist. What made Trae's comments particularly interesting was how naturally he placed Clark into conversations that are usually reserved for elite Wnba shooters. When the idea of a three-point competition involving Clark was mentioned, Trae didn't laugh it off or treat it like a gimmick. He embraced it. He even acknowledged that he would need to prepare seriously. That detail may seem small, but it revealed something important. Trae wasn't viewing Clark as a novelty. He was treating her as a legitimate competitor whose shooting ability deserved genuine respect. In the world of professional athletes, that's one of the highest compliments possible. Trae also highlighted a fascinating connection between their careers. Both players achieved an incredibly rare statistical accomplishment during their college years, leading the nation in both scoring and assists. That's not simply an impressive number, it's a reflection of a player who can dominate a game in multiple ways. By pointing out that shared achievement, Trae wasn't just praising Clark's shooting, he was recognizing her complete offensive skill set. The ability to score, create, control tempo, and elevate teammates is something basketball players respect at every level. Taken together, the comments from LeBron James and Trae Young represented something larger than simple praise. They signaled acceptance from two different corners of the NBA world. LeBron acknowledged Clark's cultural impact and the pressure she was handling. Trae recognized the basketball skills that made her impossible to ignore. One focused on influence, the other focused on talent, yet both arrived at the same conclusion: Caitlin Clark had become one of the most important stories in basketball. But as meaningful as those endorsements were, the next reactions would take things even further, because the players who spoke next weren't just discussing Clark's popularity or influence. They were evaluating her actual game, her mechanics, her decision-making, her basketball IQ. And when players like Luka Dončić and Steph Curry start breaking down your skills, it means you've entered a completely different category of respect.
Luka's reaction was fascinating because of how simple it was. There was no long explanation, no carefully crafted answer designed to make headlines. When asked about his favorite women's basketball player, Luka immediately named Caitlin Clark. The speed of the answer mattered. Great athletes often reveal their genuine opinions in those split-second responses before they have time to overthink. Luka didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to weigh options. He didn't offer multiple names. Caitlin Clark was the first answer that came to mind. That may seem like a small detail, but it revealed just how visible she had become among basketball's elite players. What makes Luka's opinion particularly valuable is the type of player he is. He isn't someone who gets impressed easily. He's a former MVP candidate, one of the most creative offensive players in the world, and someone who studies basketball at an incredibly high level. Throughout his career, Luka has earned respect by recognizing talent wherever he sees it. That's why his quick endorsement resonated with so many fans. It wasn't about media narratives or popularity contests. It felt like one elite basketball mind recognizing another player who had proven she belonged on the biggest stages. There's also something deeper hidden inside Luka's response. He understands the challenge of transitioning from hype to reality. Before arriving in the NBA, Luka entered the league carrying enormous expectations after dominating professional basketball overseas. Every move he made was analyzed, every performance was judged, every mistake became a story. In many ways, Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA facing a similar spotlight. By choosing Clark so confidently, Luka seemed to acknowledge not only her talent, but also the fact that she was successfully navigating one of the most difficult transitions in sports. Going from college sensation to professional star isn't easy, yet Clark was doing it while carrying unprecedented attention. But as meaningful as Luka's comments were, the conversation reached an entirely different level when Steph Curry weighed in. After all, there is only one Steph Curry. He isn't just the greatest shooter in NBA history, he's the player who fundamentally changed how basketball is played. Entire generations of athletes grew up modeling their games after him. Teams redesigned offensive systems because of him. Defenses evolved because of him. When Steph Curry talks about shooting,
people listen. When he compares another player's game to elements of his own, people pay very close attention. What immediately stood out about Steph's comments was the level of detail. He wasn't offering generic praise. He wasn't simply saying Caitlin Clark was a good shooter. He discussed her release time. He discussed her range. He discussed her confidence. These are the kinds of observations that only come from someone who has truly watched a player's game. Steph wasn't reacting to highlights on social media. He was analyzing the mechanics and habits that make great shooters special. And according to him, Clark possessed many of those same traits. For basketball fans, that praise carried enormous significance. Shooting from deep is one thing. Plenty of players can make difficult shots. What separates elite shooters is confidence. It's the willingness to take shots others won't attempt. It's the ability to stay aggressive after misses. It's the understanding that range isn't just about distance, it's about pressure. Steph recognized that quality in Clark immediately. He saw a player who wasn't intimidated by big moments, who wasn't afraid to pull up from well beyond the traditional three-point line, and who seemed to thrive under the spotlight rather than shrink from it. But perhaps the most important part of Curry's evaluation had nothing to do with shooting at all. In fact, he went out of his way to emphasize another aspect of Clark's game that casual viewers sometimes overlook: her playmaking, her court vision, her ability to read defenses and create opportunities for teammates. Steph pointed out that while the shooting grabs attention, her overall floor game is just as impressive. That observation matters because it's exactly the type of compliment basketball players value most. Anyone can admire a highlight. It takes a deeper understanding of the sport to appreciate the decisions happening between those highlights. What Steph was essentially saying is that Caitlin Clark isn't just a shooter, she's a complete basketball player, someone capable of impacting a game in multiple ways, someone who understands timing, spacing, vision, and leadership. For years, fans focused on her logo threes because they were impossible to ignore. But according to Steph, the true strength of her game extends far beyond those viral moments. That's a level of praise that few players ever receive, especially from someone who revolutionized the sport. Together, Luka and Steph provided something unique. They weren't talking about attendance figures or television ratings. They weren't discussing controversies or media narratives. They were evaluating basketball, pure basketball. And their verdict was clear. Caitlin Clark wasn't earning attention simply because of popularity. She was earning it because of her skill. Coming from two of the most gifted offensive players of their generation, that may have been the strongest endorsement of all. Yet, as powerful as those endorsements were, not every NBA star reacted the same way. Some players offered praise, some remained neutral, and a few responses created debates that lasted far longer than anyone expected. Because while Caitlin Clark's supporters were becoming increasingly vocal, the reactions from other stars revealed just how divided opinions could still be when it came to the biggest story in basketball. By this point, a clear pattern had emerged. Several NBA stars had openly praised Caitlin Clark. They had complimented her game, acknowledged her influence, and recognized the attention she was bringing to basketball. But if there's one thing sports fans know, it's that not every story produces unanimous agreement. In fact, sometimes the most interesting part of a story isn't who speaks up, it's who doesn't. And as the Caitlin Clark conversation continued to grow, fans began paying close attention not only to the endorsements, but also to the reactions that felt different. The hesitation, the alternative answers, the moments that sparked endless debate across social media. Suddenly, every response became part of the story. One of the reasons these reactions generated so much discussion is because Caitlin Clark had become more than just another player. Fair or unfair, she had become a symbol. To some fans, she represented the future of women's basketball. To others, she represented the massive growth and visibility the league was experiencing. And because of that, every public comment about her carried extra weight. When NBA stars praised her, supporters celebrated it.
When NBA stars focused on other players, some fans interpreted it as a slight. Whether those interpretations were accurate or not almost became secondary to the debate itself. The conversation had reached a point where every answer was being analyzed through a much larger lens. Take the reaction involving Jason Tatum. When asked about his favorite WNBA player, Tatum chose A'ja Wilson. On the surface, that's hardly a controversial answer. Wilson is one of the most accomplished players in women's basketball, a champion, an MVP, and a dominant force in the sport. Under normal circumstances, very few people would think twice about that response. But because Caitlin Clark had become such a central figure in basketball discussions, some fans immediately noticed her absence from the answer. What might have been a routine preference suddenly became a talking point. Not because Tatum criticized Clark, he didn't. Not because he dismissed her accomplishments, he didn't do that either. The debate emerged simply because people expected her name to come up. That reaction revealed something fascinating about Clark's position in sports. Expectations surrounding her had grown so large that even neutral answers could become headlines. That's a rare level of visibility. Most athletes don't create conversations when they're not mentioned. Clark had reached a point where her absence in a discussion could generate almost as much attention as her presence. Whether fans viewed that as fair or unfair, it demonstrated just how much influence she had over the broader basketball conversation. A similar situation unfolded when Kevin Durant's comments became the topic of discussion. Durant, like many NBA veterans, has always been known for speaking his mind and supporting players he respects. When his responses didn't align with what some Clark supporters expected, debate quickly followed. Once again, there was no major criticism directed toward Clark. Yet, because she had become the center of so many conversations, fans analyzed every detail. Every answer was examined, every preference was scrutinized, every omission became a potential storyline. The reaction wasn't necessarily about what was said, it was about what people expected to hear. What's interesting is that these moments actually reinforced the same point that Clark's supporters were making all along. Truly influential athletes don't just generate praise, they generate discussion. They force people to have opinions. Think about some of the biggest stars in sports history: Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Tom Brady, Serena Williams, Tiger Woods. None of them existed in a space where everyone agreed about everything. Greatness often creates strong reactions because it changes expectations, it challenges existing narratives, it forces people to reassess what they thought they knew. In many ways, the debates surrounding Caitlin Clark reflected that exact phenomenon. Another factor driving these conversations was the unprecedented nature of her rise. The attention surrounding Clark wasn't happening gradually over a decade-long career. It exploded almost immediately. Television ratings surged, arenas sold out, social media engagement skyrocketed. The pace of that growth naturally created different opinions about what it meant. Some people viewed it as a transformative moment for the sport. Others emphasized the contributions of players who helped build the league long before Clark arrived. Neither perspective necessarily required hostility toward the other, yet fans often frame the discussion as if they were competing viewpoints. That tension helped fuel many of the debates surrounding player reactions. Perhaps the biggest takeaway from all of this is that the differing responses themselves became evidence of Clark's impact. If she were simply another talented rookie, there wouldn't be endless analysis of who mentioned her and who didn't. There wouldn't be debates about interview answers. There wouldn't be constant discussions about what certain comments meant. The reason those conversations existed at all was because Caitlin Clark had become one of the most important figures in basketball. People cared about the reactions because they cared about the story. And that's what makes this entire situation so remarkable. Some NBA stars openly praised her. Some offered different perspectives. Some focused on other players. Yet all of those responses, whether positive, neutral, or simply different, pointed toward the same reality. Caitlin Clark had become impossible to ignore.
Every comment seemed to circle back to her. Every debate seemed to involve her. Every conversation somehow found its way back to the impact she was having on the sport. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture, that may be the most telling sign of all, because long after the individual quotes fade away, long after the debates move on to the next topic, one fact remains impossible to overlook. Caitlin Clark changed the conversation. The only question left is just how far that change will ultimately go.